So with that, I'm going to get ready and introduce our next speaker is Jen McCollum, the CEO of Linkage. She will offer a bold new vision of inclusion called Superpowers and Symphony, which redesigns inclusion to address systemic inequality while engaging employees in delivering organizational goals. So again, post your questions in real time. I would love to get started, and Jen is going to present Inclusion Redesigned, Actionable Steps to Transform Your Leaders and Organizations. With that, Jen, I would love to toss the mic over to you and have you get started.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Charlene. Let's just get thank you. We got the deck going. Redesigning inclusion. What a critical time right now to have this conversation. I think deep down, we know that what we've been doing in inclusion for all these years might not be working. And we're here today to offer what we think is a new path forward, but also a bold path forward. A path that we think does address systemic inequity, but it's also a path that engages our employees while delivering the aspirational organizational goals that we all have as the world now reemerges. So why now? Well, 2020 was quite a year. I know it's a year I'll never forget. I'm guessing you feel the same way. I can picture recounting the last 12 months to my children and to my children's children for many, many years to come. This global pandemic, the resulting impact, especially on women, especially on minorities, the divisiveness of our politics, the social injustice, the racism. And for all of us, I think it's been a year filled with fear and loss and anxiety, maybe some uncertainty, certainly chaos and unrest. But, you know, it's also been an awakening. It's been an awakening for me. It's been an awakening for the world. And I believe we're at a critical turning point right now, because these divisions that have existed for generations have not been adequately addressed. And finally, in the last year alone, this demand has grown louder and louder. How do we develop? How do we support inclusive leaders, inclusive organizations, and inclusive societies? And I want to be real for a moment here. This awakening certainly isn't all new, not for most of us here at this conference anyway. We've been working collectively on efforts to accelerate inclusion for many years, perhaps even 2 decades, like I just heard from the last speaker. And we've been investing. We've been working hard, but it's not working, at least not fast enough. And our collective efforts aren't showing enough impact, measurable impact. And why do I say this? For the last year, Linkage set out to uncover why. Why isn't it working? And how can we demystify and decode inclusion in our organizations? And to do this, we actually did a study, and we identified 55 drivers, 55 practices of inclusion, things that all of us frequently use in our organizations, things like ERGs and diversity goals and unconscious bias training. And then we interviewed people like you, heads of HR, heads of D&I, across large organizations, as well as a deep survey of professionals, primarily leaders across industries. And the results were really surprising. It showed that despite these really well-intended, even well-designed efforts, we are not creating more inclusive cultures. None of these boxes that you see on the left are actually working. Now, they may be doing other things like fulfilling diversity targets, or maybe allowing like groups with similar backgrounds to come together and to network and to connect. And those in and of themselves are good things, but these initiatives aren't driving the perception of inclusion in our cultures, in our organizations. And in fact, a bigger surprise there on the right was that our research exposed some actions, things like happy hours or social outings, are actually harming inclusion. All right, so why is there such a lack of impact? We surfaced 4 reasons. Number 1, often D&I sits under HR, but as this independent, and under-resourced function, and often very disconnected from the broader business strategy. And an example is I spoke to the head of HR at a very large insurance company last year, and she was lamenting that her executive team believed that their inclusion efforts were all well taken care of because they've relegated inclusion to their ERGs. Second, we're meeting the bare minimum. It's either by choice or more likely by limitation of resources, or maybe not knowing what to do. A colleague of mine who ran a multi-million-dollar business unit at one of the largest tech companies in the world said to me, she was required to ensure that each one of her employees attended a 2 or 3 hour webinar on unconscious bias, and that somehow magically they would emerge as more inclusive. But we can't compliance train or check the box our way to inclusion. And the last two things are really about the content of our programs themselves. The training that we do can actually reinforce difference, and sometimes participants can feel targeted or blamed. You may be familiar with the Lean In study that came out a little over a year ago, pre-COVID, and it highlighted this concerning trend that men are afraid to make a wrong move, and so they're choosing not to make a move at all. So instead of encouraging or supporting or mentoring or becoming allies for, in this case, women, they're actually not making a move out of fear of some type of repercussion. And finally, we're doing a decent job of addressing the symptoms, but not always addressing into the root cause. And what I mean by that is we're now talking about things like microaggressions or unconscious bias or privilege. And we can spend time there understanding that, but we believe we need to shift our focus even more toward what do we need to do differently to become part of the solution. So here's some good news. Our employees really want a new way forward. So in our study, our leadership survey, 80% of them said, hey, inclusivity in our organization is really, really important. But only 44% of our executive teams are prioritizing it, and only 8% said their organization was effective at it. So here we are. The world has awakened to inclusion. We keep trying different things. We could keep going and hope that something will work out eventually, but will it? Will it really? I want to tell a story of something that looked okay at first glance. So this house here, Sarah Winchester moved into this house in San Jose, 1884. Her husband had died and she'd inherited this Winchester rifle fortune. And for many of us, we look at this house and we say, yeah, it looks pretty good on the outside. But Sarah didn't think so. She thought the house was haunted. So she decided the house had to be changed completely, and that would solve the problem. So she told the builders to work day and night without any master plan or without any blueprint. And here's how the house ended up. This is from the back. 161 rooms, 40 bedrooms, 47 fireplaces, many stairs that actually led to nowhere, and one working toilet. And the original problem still existed. The house was still haunted. And I think this story is kind of a perfect analogy for how we're dealing with inclusion up to this point. Despite really good intentions, we're building a flawed house with stairs that lead to nowhere. So instead of trying to fix what's been there for years or decades or centuries, perhaps we need a brand new house and a brand new fresh start. So across the last year, as we were conducting our research to surface these new perspectives on inclusion, we actually found a really fresh voice with a similar perspective, and her name is Ashoke Abalu. She's our Linkage partner now and our super friend. She's also an inclusion architect and a futurist. And she had been working for the last 18 months creating this new language and this new framework of inclusion. And she called it Superpowers and Symphony. And at the same time she was doing that, Linkage was surfacing the latest research and focused development around our new perspective on inclusion. And we were weaving that into our assessments and our training and our coaching and consulting. And when we got together, we believed that we could radically innovate in this space. So what is Superpowers in Symphony? It's this invitation to create a new house, a new story of human connection and of organizational unity. And it's a vision where this unified symphony is the overall goal of the organization, where everybody can contribute their unique superpowers in collaboration toward a common outcome. So we like this new language because with it, we can stop telling the story of our divided past, and we can start telling the story of a united future. And it's more than symbolic. It's actually moving away from language that divides us. Even the word diversity actually literally means bringing together difference. And even language like inclusion means I'm going to move over and I'm going to make space for the other. Those of us in the majority will move over and make a little bit of space, but really the other should have been there all along. So we chose the word superpowers to represent this uniqueness. Think about it as every instrument, every unique instrument in an orchestra offering a very critical and unique contribution. And symphony is the vision, the outcome when every single instrument is operating individually at its fullest potential and coming together collectively to create something even greater. And that only can happen when all of us are welcomed and valued and respected for the equal role that each of us plays. And without every one of those instruments, the symphony simply isn't complete. So I want to spend some time now exploring more deeply superpowers in symphony and how to get there in a really practical way, the application of that to leaders and to organizations. And I want to start with superpowers. When we studied what is actually driving inclusion in organizations, we learned that one of the most important things that we can do as leaders is to discover the superpowers in ourselves and the superpowers in the members of our team. And what we mean by that is to specifically identify and value and leverage those unique strengths of each individual. And then we want to align those strengths to the greatest need of the organization. It takes time. It sounds easy. It's not. And it really requires focusing very intently on others, identifying what they each bring to this organizational symphony. So when we can do that, it moves away from thinking about each of us in our roles or our race or our gender or our age or our sexuality or our disability. And instead it focuses us on our uniqueness as our superpower. And let's talk about how you actually do that. We focus on 3 elements: your strengths, what is easy for you, but maybe not so easy for others. This isn't just what you're good at, it's what you are uniquely good at. The second is your story. We're all the sum of our unique experiences, and our story is unique. Nobody else has our story. So for me, as an example, I grew up overseas. I moved to the United States for the first time when I was in middle school, and I was raised in later high school years by a single mother school teacher. So my story really shaped who I am today. And finally, perspective, your outlook, your opinions that are built from our strengths and experience. So the easiest place to start is strengths, and I'll tell you a quick story. Several months ago, when Ashoke and I were starting our partnership and the broader partnership with our organizations, we were deepening our understanding of each other. We were getting to know each other with our strengths and the strengths of our team. And we were all on Zoom last year, and I saw my daughter walk by in the camera. And so I ran and I opened the door and I dragged her in and I said, Madeline, she was 18 at the time. Madeline, I want to introduce you to Ashoke, our new Linkage partner. And Ashoke immediately looked at her and said, Madeline, tell me, what is your superpower? And Madeline kind of froze. She was embarrassed. She was self-conscious. And she said, nobody has ever asked me that before. So Ashoke jumped in and she said, language is my superpower. I use my words to inspire and to connect. And I jumped in and said, Vision is my superpower. I can see and create this clear picture of what success looks like way down the road. And then I can rally and motivate and inspire a team to get there. And she still was quiet and she thought for another minute. And then she kind of lit up and she said, you know, people tell me everything. They trust me. Listening is my superpower. And it was one of those moments that I won't forget, because if people see you in your superpower, then these other identities tend to fall away. And that was an example of Madeline getting in touch with her strength as her uniqueness much earlier in life than I did. We're actually not going to cover the other two things today, but in our development programs, we actually teach these things. We have participants practice telling their stories and surfacing their perspectives and their strengths, because it's the sum of those three things that create your superpowers. So we're going to do a quick activity right now. Without too much thought or reflection, I want you to put your superpower into the chat so we can collectively see it and honor it and celebrate it. So we'll take a moment to do that, and then I'll invite Charlene to come and maybe read some of the things that she's seeing. We'll give it a minute for those things to pop up with the delay.
Hi, Jen. So we are starting to hear from some people with their superpowers. I'd love to share what I think my superpower is. And I saw your slide about perspective, and I feel like that's a good superpower that I have in my team. We are hearing from other people in the group empathy, and I think that that's very important right now. And I'm waiting for a few others to load as well, but I think that intuition, persistence, these are wonderful, wonderful. And I think, a lot of people are saying empathy. So we have multiple empathies, and I think that that's really timely and that's perfect for this event. So these are a few: intuition, persistence, empathy. I do love the example of perspective, building connections, confidence, accessibility. Someone posted my energy, connection, intuition, calmness, empathetic listening, problem solving. This is wonderful.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And just enjoy that. I'm going to bathe in the superpowers of everybody in this virtual conference. And I will say one other thing. Sometimes your superpower emerges when it's reflected back to you. And that's by others telling you what they see as your superpower. So Ashoke, as an example, didn't identify language as her superpower by herself. Somebody told her that the way she spoke inspired her. And she had never seen anyone use language to connect like Ashoke does. And it's true, I've experienced her that way as well. So we know our superpowers are most valued when the intention you're putting out into the world is reflected back by others. So I'm going to offer one more challenge assignment for you to do after the session. I want you to write down 3 people who are close to you, people who really know you, professionally and personally, ideally. And I want you to text them. And I want you to ask them what they see as your superpower, and then ask yourself, how does that align with your own thinking about your superpower? So why is this important? Why is it important to inclusion at work? Well, if we can amplify the uniqueness of others, especially others on our teams, and as leaders, if we know our own superpowers and the superpowers of the individuals who report to us, we can consciously bring teams together that will create more innovation, better decision-making, better business results. Because we often think right now diversity as uniting difference. Let's just put difference together. But really, when we think about superpowers, it's honoring the uniqueness and carefully curating the uniqueness of others aligned to the greatest needs of the organization. And now we're going to turn to Symphony. We're going to create a word cloud together. Based on what you've heard, based on what you know so far, we want you to, it should be in the chat right now, we want you to either open your phone quickly or another tab in your browser, go to menti.com and use the code you see here on the screen and answer the question, what is the one word when you think of Symphony? What does Symphony mean to you? And while we're building the word cloud, we're going to play a video. And this video is an actual depiction of when superpowers are honored in the uniqueness of each individual. And then when they come together to create Symphony. So enjoy the video while we build the word cloud.
Leaders lead with love, learning to light the way with candlesticks of understanding, which fumigates the stench of dysfunction through tolerance, empathy, inclusion, diversity, grace, and gratitude towards those who stick to policies with positivity steeped in a harmonious symphony of synergy. Great leaders amend their energy without question for the sake of quality output and profit, setting a solid example without exception. Wise leaders listen, open to learning lessons from lesser positions, whether work is remote or in a cubicle. It's critical for every change agent to channel their superpowers in order to transform any norms that fail to form inclusivity. So we recalculate, reevaluate, recalibrate, concentrate to retain a new language that conveys effective ways to work better together as one.
All right. Thank you so much. We love that depiction of superpowers in Symphony. It shows what our vision could look like when all of our superpowers are honored and needed. Each needs the other to realize its full potential in an orchestra, just like in our organizations. So now we're seeing our word cloud build. Thank you, Sam, my producer in the background. And I love some of the words I'm seeing: harmony, beauty, compilation, harmonious, collection. And these are the kinds of words we want our employees to feel when they're part of our organizations and they feel like their uniqueness is honored and they're able to contribute and belong as a collective. So let's transition now. We've painted the picture of the vision of inclusion redesigned, called Superpowers in Symphony. This new story really is meant to engage the hearts and minds of people, but also to impact our bottom line results while creating organizations where people can bring their full selves to work. I want to get super practical now. How do you actually create superpowers in Symphony? And we do that through what's called the 4R framework. And these are practical and actionable keys that will unlock and sustain inclusive organizations. The first is relanguage, and this is about creating awareness, creating understanding, even the curiosity and the commitment required to do something different. This is about building a new house, to stop telling the story of our past, to start telling the story of our future. There's a Buckminster Fuller quote, to change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. The second is recalibrate. And this moves from awareness to awakening and an understanding of where we are today. Where am I as a leader? Where are we as an organization? Because we have to understand our current reality and really face the truth of where we are so that we can focus our efforts for change. So this is about objective measurement. We want to create a baseline so we can build on it for the future. The third is refocus. Refocus is about action. How are we going to get from here to there? And we've used our research to surface what are the most important drivers of inclusion at the individual leadership level and at the organizational level. And in our virtual booth, we have white papers on both of those things so that you can get all of the information. But we can teach those behaviors and those capabilities at multiple levels for the entire workforce, for leaders, and for executives. And our development is really focused on that shifting mindset. We know we need to give all of us access to new information, new resources, new tools to change, but we also have to support our workforce in the choice to change. And we need to teach them how. And finally, it's reunite. And this is about alignment. How do we expand? How do we sustain this inclusion effort collectively? So on the next page, we've actually built our offerings around these 4 keys. It doesn't really matter where you start. It depends on the objectives you have as an organization. But I will do it in the order that I think is best. For relanguage, it's about building that awareness, is that introduction to the new language, the new possibility, the new framework. And we do this in keynote addresses that we can offer up to the entire organization, and also through 3-hour, what we call play shops for leaders and executives to help them build this consideration, this curiosity of a new approach, and for them to start to plan for how that might impact their leadership and their team. And a quick example of this in a technology organization, recently Ashoke was giving a keynote address, and the employees voted and requested that the CEO change the title of the head of diversity and inclusion to the head of Symphony. They believed that even the language around Symphony was more aligned with their intention. Recalibrate is about measurement. We measure leaders at the individual and organizational level. I understand that came up earlier today. We actually have scientifically validated measurement instruments to support this awakening at the individual level. We often think we're far more inclusive than we actually are. So it's good to have that objective perspective, kind of to hold a mirror up for us. And at the organizational level, we need to understand where we are in terms of the employee base's perception of inclusion so that we can build a strategy around inclusion. For Refocus, we teach inclusion at different levels. To the workforce and early career leaders, we do that via self-paced, digital, asynchronous development, and we can wrap conversations around that. And then we offer very deep, immersive, virtual or live experiences for senior leaders and executives. And for Reunite, we've started with the Superpowers and Symphony pledge, and we're inviting participants in our programs to take the pledge and pass it on by identifying and honoring the superpowers of others. So in closing, we believe it is time. It's time to rebuild this inclusion house from the ground up. We actually know what we're doing now isn't working, certainly not for everyone. We need to move from a tactical, disconnected approach to a strategic approach, aligned to business goals, moving from bringing kind of a blame or a shame unintentionally, but bringing that to the surface toward creating a space where we have a fostering of appreciation of our own uniqueness and that of others. And finally, we want to stop reacting to symptoms or what we're doing wrong and identifying solutions that will reach deep into the root cause and teach new behaviors and new activities. So in closing, I invite you to read with me. Can you imagine a time when your team or your workforce willingly takes this pledge because they believe in Superpowers and Symphony as inclusion redesigned? In the face of social injustice and inequity, I hereby pledge to redesign inclusion as Symphony and to shift my focus from what separates us to what unites us. I pledge to cultivate my uniqueness as my superpowers and to amplify the uniqueness and superpowers of others. I am the solution. We believe this is the new path forward, and we hope you will join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. We do have time for one question, if I could squeeze this in before we have a brief break. And that is, how can we determine if our D&I efforts internally are having the intended impact without continuing to invest?
That is such a great question. And this is where I move to our organizational assessment. In 6 or 8 minutes, we can actually deploy a survey to your organization or a subset of the organization where they offer their perception of the organization's talent systems, executive action or commitment, their culture, and their leadership development. And when we have that data, we can look at it and see what is working and what is not.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we've had a lot of discussions today, Jen, about data. So absolutely necessary right now as we all continue to move forward in our current climate. So, and uncover those gaps and whatnot. So thank you again so much, Jen. I'm going to get ready for our next session. So for now, I want to thank you for joining us and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Charlene. Bye-bye.